This is the trap. Every spring, you buy another round of fertilizer, another bottle of liquid feed, another sack labeled Garden Miracle, and you pour it onto ground that has no biological machinery left to process it. Imagine spooning broth into the mouth of someone whose digestive system has shut down. The nutrients sit there, they oxidize, they leach, they do nothing, because the bacteria breaking starches into plant-available sugars are gone. The fungi, threading phosphorus from particle to root tip, have been starved out. The protozoa meant to cycle nitrogen simply do not exist in that ground anymore. You're not dealing with poor soil, you're dealing with a dead operating system. And no software update fixes hardware that has been physically removed. The frustration is real. You watch your neighbor's yard or some influencer's raised bed, and you think the difference is skill or money or some secret product. But the difference is almost always underneath, invisible, microbial, your soil. Entered dormancy the way a bear enters hibernation. Except nobody gave it the signal to wake up. Every chemical drench, every season of bare dirt baking under the summer sun. Every time you tilled and shattered the fungal networks that took months to form, you pushed it deeper into that coma. And the system you trusted on the back of every fertilizer bag, the one sold at every garden center, was never designed to bring it back. So you stand there with cracked earth under your boots, a receipt for $60 of amendments in your pocket, and wilting seedlings that look worse than before you fed them. The soil isn't asking for more inputs, it is asking for a pulse, and that pulse has been running down your kitchen drain every single time you rinsed a pot of rice, a cloudy, starch-heavy liquid most people never think about twice. Left to sit for 2 or 3 days, something shifts inside that jar, the cloudiness thickens, a faint sour smell rises. Lactobacillus colonies are exploding in number, doubling every few hours, turning dead carbohydrate into a living inoculant. When that fermented water hits your silent ground, it doesn't feed the soil like fertilizer pretends to, it repopulates it. Here is the thing nobody told you when you started. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer you poured onto that garden did something far worse than waste your money. It sterilized the system supposed to feed your plants for free. Picture this. Beneath healthy soil, there is a network of fungal threads, thinner than human hair, stretching meters in every direction, connecting root to root, plant to plant, exchanging minerals, water, even chemical warnings when pests arrive, a living internet made of biology. The first thing a handful of chemical nitrogen does when it hits is burn that network to ash, not slowly, not over years. Now think about what tilling does. You take a shovel or rototiller and shred that underground architecture into confetti. Every tunnel an earthworm spent weeks building, gone. Every pocket of oxygen crushed. Every colony of bacteria quietly converting dead leaves into phosphorus is exposed to UV light and killed in hours, and then you wonder why. The soil compacts into concrete by midsummer, and the so-called nutrient-rich potting mixes, the ones in bright bags with pictures of perfect tomatoes, most are peat stripped from wetlands taking thousands of years to form, mixed with slow-release chemical pellets designed to feed for exactly 6 weeks, just long enough for you to believe it worked, just short enough to come back and buy another bag. That is not gardening. The herbicides are the final insult. You spray to kill weeds, and what actually dies is the microbial life, the immune system of the soil itself. Without that layer, pathogens move in unchecked. Roots rot, fungal diseases explode. You were never bad at growing food. You were running a living system on poison, wondering why it flatlined. The frustration of a yellowed plant or barren bed was not your failure. It was the predictable outcome of an approach engineered to keep you buying. Picture a forest floor that nobody has touched in 100 years. No one fertilizes it, no one waters it on a schedule, and yet every single organism there is fed. The leaves fall, the fungi arrive, the bacteria multiply, and the soil becomes a living engine, running without human input. Now ask yourself why your backyard cannot do the same thing. Beneath healthy earth is a network, so dense it makes the internet look primitive. Fungal threads thinner than human hair stretch outward in every direction, connecting root to root, plant to plant, sometimes spanning entire hillsides. Scientists call it the mycorrhizal network. You can think of it as a living postal system buried in darkness. One plant gets attacked by an insect, and within hours neighboring plants ramp up their chemical defenses. Because the fungi carried the warning signal underground. One tree captures more sugar than it needs, and the excess flows through these threads to a smaller seedling. Now here is what matters for your soil. This network does not build itself on bare, chemically treated ground. It needs a trigger, it needs food. Specifically, simple sugars and starches delivered gently into the earth. The top layer, the zone where microbial life is densest. When starch enters that zone, bacteria consume it first and populations explode. That push can come from something absurd in its simplicity. The cloudy water left over after you rinse a cup of rice, not fresh though, fermented, and left in a glass jar for 2 days, covered with a breathable cloth, kept away from sunlight, until a faint sour smell rises and a thin foam forms on the surface. At that point, the liquid is no longer starch water. You dilute it, 1 part fermented liquid to 4 parts. Clean water, no chlorine, because chlorine is a sterilizer, and you're trying to do the opposite of sterilizing. You pour it directly onto the ground, not the leaves evenly, as if you were offering a meal to something you cannot see. Soil should be dry, or just barely damp, so the liquid sinks rather than pools. And then you walk away, you do nothing else. Within days, the bacterial colonies reorganize. Fungal hyphae begin extending from dormant spores that may have waited months for exactly this signal. The soil texture shifts, it darkens, it holds moisture differently. And if you watch carefully, you'll notice the first earthworms returning, not because you imported them, but because you rebuilt the conditions they require to survive. This isn't a hack, this isn't a trick, this is the operating system that every forest uses. Every prairie and wetland has been running it for millennia, all without a single bag of fertilizer. And the reason you were never shown it is simple. There is no profit margin in rice water and patience. But the soil doesn't care about profit margins, it only cares about the code. Here is the part that flips everything you thought you knew about effort. You did nothing dramatic. You laid down cardboard over cracked, silent ground. You piled kitchen scraps and dead leaves on top. You poured out the starchy water left over from rinsing rice, the kind most people dump straight down the drain without a second thought, and then you just walked away. Within 24 hours, something shifts that you almost miss. You miss it if you aren't paying attention. The surface loses that pale, chalky dryness. The color deepens just slightly, as though moisture is held in place by invisible hands. No rain fell, and you added no irrigation. By the second day, your fingers tell you what your eyes cannot. Press into the ground beside your cardboard edge, and it yields. There is a softness forming, an elasticity that was completely absent just 48 hours ago. The earth feels like it is inhaling for the first time in months. Still no fireworks, still nothing a casual observer would photograph. Then day 3 arrives and removes all doubt. You crouch down and notice the soil surface rippling with a faint, subtle movement. Not imagination, not wind, just earthworms, small ones threading upward, larger ones gliding freely across the moist ground, drawn by the feast you created with nothing more than waste and neglect. They came because the environment finally made sense to them, dark, damp, rich in carbon, and completely undisturbed. And here is the counterintuitive truth nobody wants to accept. You achieved this not by adding expensive inputs, not by tilling, not by spraying, not by following a complicated schedule. You achieved it by doing less. Cardboard suppressed weeds and held moisture, scraps fed microbes. Starky water jump-started bacterial populations, and leaves insulated temperature swings. Once those worms settle in, the soil darkens on its own. Water stops pooling on the surface and sinks straight through the crumb structure they engineer with their tunnels. Plants rooted in this ground push out thicker stems, deeper green, stronger resistance to pests, all without a single bottle of anything from a store shelf. The living system feeds itself now. This is the lever most people never pull because it looks like laziness, it looks like giving up. But the forest floor has been running this exact protocol for millennia, running without a single human hand intervening. You aren't doing less because you're careless. You're doing less because the system literally performs better. It performs better when you stop interrupting it. Every shovel, stroke, every bag of synthetic amendment, every rototiller pass was an interruption disguised as progress. Now picture two neighbors on the same street, 6 months from today. A. Supply chain buckles somewhere upstream, the way they always do eventually. Shelves go thin, prices double overnight. One stands in a checkout line at dawn, heart pounding, grabbing whatever wilted greens remain under fluorescent light, paying 3 times what those leaves cost last week. The other walks barefoot. Into a backyard that hums, she pulls a handful of kale, still cool with morning dew, digs a few potatoes from beneath a mat of straw, and carries breakfast. Inside before the sun clears the fence, no panic, no line, no price tag. Neighborhood, completely different relationship with survival. That difference didn't come from money or talent or acreage. It came from a single decision made months earlier. The decision to stop outsourcing the most basic act of being alive. You already saw what happens when soil wakes up. Earthworms return, and fungal threads reconnect. Nutrients cycle without a single bag from the store. But here is what nobody says out loud. That living ground beneath your feet isn't just a garden. It is a quiet insurance policy that no bank sells and no government guarantees. Every square meter of self-regenerating soil is a vote you cast with your own hands, a vote that says your family eats, regardless of what happens to a truck route, or a trade agreement, or a corporate quarterly report. Think about what you actually depend on right now. Seed companies owned by chemical firms, refrigerated freight crossing 3 borders, packaging, plants, fuel prices, labor disputes. Disputes you'll never hear about until the shelf is empty. Every single link in that chain is someone else's decision. And you're at the end of it, wallet open, hoping today isn't the day it snaps. That isn't food security, that is food luck. But the soil you built doesn't care about diesel costs. The worms beneath your mulch don't read futures markets. The mycorrhizal web threading through your root zone has been running its own logistics network for 400 million years, and it never once needed a subsidy. When you cultivated life underground instead of pouring chemicals on top, you did something far bigger than growing tomatoes. You stepped outside a system designed to keep you dependent, and you planted your feet on solid ground that answers only to rain and biology. This isn't a hobby. Hobbies are things you do when everything else is comfortable. This is what you do precisely because comfort isn't guaranteed. Every crisis in living memory, every empty shelf photograph, every frantic news headline about grain shipments, all of it circles back to one brutal truth. The people who grow real food in living soil don't panic, they harvest. So the question is no longer whether your soil can come back to life. You already know that it can. The question is whether you'll let that knowledge sit idle or whether you'll use it to build something no economy can take from you. Because the moment your ground feeds you without asking permission from a fragile supply chain, you're no longer a consumer, you are sovereign.